I said move, he screamed, his fake security badge catching the afternoon sun. The child's mother stepped forward, her voice deadly calm. Lower the weapon now. Marcus laughed, drunk on his imaginary authority. What are you going to do about it, lady? The woman's eyes turned ice cold as she reached slowly into her jacket. Sir, you just threatened a federal agent's daughter. I'm Special Agent Sarah Martinez. FBI Tactical Operations. You have 3 seconds to comply before this becomes a federal incident. The color drained from Marcus's face as he realized his world was about to explode. The sound of children's laughter echoed through Willowbrook. The state says 8-year-old Emma Martinez chased a bright red ball down the pristine sidewalk. The manicured lawns stretched endlessly in both directions, each house a monument to suburban perfection. Emma's sneakers squeaked against the concrete as she lunged for the ball, her dark ponytail bouncing with each step. Careful, Mia. Sarah. Martinez called from their front porch, where she was watering the small garden they'd planted just 2 weeks ago. Moving to this neighborhood had been a dream-a-safe place where Emma could play outside without worry, where the biggest concern was whether the sprinklers would hit the mail carrier. Emma scooped up the ball and turned, back toward their house. Number 47, Maple Lane, when a harsh voice cut through the peaceful afternoon air. Hey, you can't play here. Sarah's head snapped up to see a man striding across the street toward Emma. He was tall and lanky, wearing an ill-fitting blue uniform with a badge that caught the sunlight. His face was flushed red with anger, and his hands were clenched into fists at his sides. This is a private community, the man shouted, now just 20 feet from Emma. Kids aren't allowed to play on the sidewalks. Sarah set down her watering can and started walking toward them, her maternal instincts immediately on high alert. She'd never seen this man before, and something about his aggressive posture made her skin crawl. Sir, Sarah called out, her voice calm but firm. That's my daughter, and we live here. There's no rule against children playing. The man whirled around to face her, his pale blue eyes blazing with indignation. I'm Marcus Chen, head of HOA security. He jabbed his finger to the badge on his chest, and I'm telling you that ball playing is strictly prohibited in this community. Sarah continued walking toward Emma, who had frozen in place, clutching the red ball against her chest. The fear in her daughter's eyes sent a surge of protective fury through Sarah's veins. Mr. Chen, I've read the HOA guidelines thoroughly, Sarah said, stopping about 10 feet away from him. There's no mention of children being prohibited from playing on public sidewalks. Marcus's face grew even redder. Listen here, lady. I don't care what you think you read. I make the rules around here, and I'm telling you to get that kid inside. Before I call the police, Mommy. Emma's small voice wavered with confusion and fear. Marcus exploded, spittle flying from his lips. Nothing about this is okay. You people think you can just move into our neighborhood and do whatever you want. The words hung in the air like a slap across the face. Sarah felt her jaw clench as the implication hit her. She'd faced this kind of thinly veiled racism before, but never directed at her child. Excuse me? Sarah's voice dropped to a dangerous whisper. Marcus seemed to realize he'd crossed a line, but instead of backing down, he doubled down. You heard me. We have standards here. Order, discipline, things your kind wouldn't understand. Several neighbors had emerged from their houses now, drawn by the commotion. Mrs. Patterson from next door stood on her porch with her arms crossed, while Mr. Rodriguez across the street held his phone up, clearly recording my kind. Sarah took another step forward, her hands slowly moving to her hips. And what kind would that be, Mr. Chen? The kind that doesn't respect authority. Marcus shot back, the kind that thinks rules don't apply to them. Emma had started crying now, quiet tears streaming down her cheeks as she watched her mother face off with this angry stranger. The sight of her daughter's distress pushed Sarah past her breaking point. Emma, sweetheart, please go sit on our porch, Sarah said, her voice steel wrapped in velvet. But Mom, now baby, please. Emma hurried toward their house, the red ball forgotten on the sidewalk between Sarah and Marcus. That's right, run away, Marcus called after the little girl. Maybe next time you'll think twice before breaking the rules. Sarah's control snapped. She started walking toward Marcus with purposeful strides, her training automatically taking over, her shoulders squared, her breathing controlled, every muscle in her body coiled like a spring. Mr. Chen, she said, her voice carrying an authority that made Marcus take an involuntary step backward. You just made this personal. I'm warning you, Marcus stammered, fumbling at his belt. Stay back, or ill. I single quotes, LL, ... you will. What? Sarah continued advancing, noting how his hands shook as he reached for something on his utility belt. That's when Marcus's trembling fingers found the grip of what looked like a service weapon. Sarah's blood turned to ice as he pulled out a black pistol, pointing it directly at her chest. I said, stay back. Marcus screamed, his voice cracking with hysteria. The neighborhood fell silent, except for the sound of Emma's terrified sobbing from the porch. Mrs. Patterson gasped and ducked behind her doorframe. Mr. Rodriguez's phone captured every second. As Marcus waved the gun in Sarah's direction, put the weapon down, Sarah said, her voice deadly calm despite the adrenaline flooding her system. Years of tactical training kicked in as she assessed the situation. The gun looked real, but Marcus' grip was all wrong, his stance amateur. Still, amateur or not, a bullet could kill. I'm the authority here, Marcus shouted, sweat beading on his forehead. You will respect my authority. Sir, you need to lower that weapon immediately. No. Marcus swung the pistol toward Emma, who was now huddled against the front door of their house. Maybe I should. Teach that little brat some respect. The moment the gun pointed at her daughter, Sarah's world narrowed to a single, crystalline point of focus. Every instinct she'd honed over 15 years in federal law enforcement screamed at her to neutralize the threat. Her hand moved toward her jacket with practiced precision. Last warning, Sarah said, her voice carrying the weight of absolute authority. Lower your weapon. Marcus laughed, a high-pitched, hysterical sound. What are you going to do about it, lady? Call the cops. I am the cops here. Sarah's jacket fell open, revealing the FBI badge clipped to her belt and the Glock 19 in its shoulder holster. Sir, you are currently threatening a federal agent and her minor child with a deadly weapon. I am Special Agent Sarah Martinez, FBI, Tactical Operations Division. The change in Marcus's expression was instantaneous. His eyes went wide with shock, the color draining from his face like water from a broken dam. You have exactly 3 seconds to drop that weapon and get on the ground. Sarah continued, her own service weapon now in her hand, trained on Marcus's center mass. 1. Marcus's gun hand began to shake violently. 2. The fake badge on Marcus's chest caught the afternoon light one last time as his legs gave out beneath him, sending him crashing to his knees on the pristine sidewalk. Marcus Chen's knees hit the concrete with a sickening crack, his fake weapon clattering across the sidewalk like a child's discarded toy. The collapse of a man's entire fabricated world. Don't shoot. Please don't shoot. Marcus sobbed, his hands raised above his head as tears and snot streamed down his face. The transformation from aggressive authority figure to cowering imposter was so complete that several neighbors gasped audibly. Sarah kept her Glock trained on him, her stance textbook perfect, her breathing controlled, fingers interlaced. Do it now. Marcus complied with shaking hands, his shoulders heaving with panicked breaths. I'm sorry. I'm so sorry. I didn't know. I swear I didn't know. What you didn't know, Sarah said, moving closer while maintaining her sightline, is that threatening federal agents and their children carries a mandatory minimum of 10 years in federal prison, her elderly face pale with shock. Marcus, what have you done? What have you done, ma'am? Please stay back, Sarah called without taking her eyes off Marcus. This is now a federal crime scene. Mr. Rodriguez, still recording from across the street, spoke up. Agent Martinez, I got everything on video. From the moment he pulled that gun on your daughter, thank you, Mr. Rodriguez. Please don't delete that footage. Of training kept her focused on the immediate threat. Marcus Chen, Sarah began, her voice carrying the weight of federal authority. And child endangerment. The FBI will be taking over this investigation within the hour. But I'm HOA security, Marcus wailed. I was just doing my job. Your job. Sarah's voice turned ice cold. Let me tell you about your job, Mr. Chen. Her free hand, never wavering her aim, and speed dialed a number. It rang twice before a crisp voice answered, Martinez. Director Walsh, I need a tactical team at my location immediately. We have a code yellow involving my daughter. Within seconds, Sarah could hear Walsh barking orders in the background. ETA 15 minutes. Are you secure? Suspect is detained. Weapon recovered. Sarah looked down at Marcus, who was still sobbing into the sidewalk. I need a full background check. On Marcus Chen, current address 52 Oak Street, Willowbrook Estates, claims to be HOA security, but something's not adding up. On it, stay on the line. Mrs. Patterson had been listening to every word, and now she stepped forward with her hands clasped nervously. Agent Martinez, place is going to be crawling with federal agents. Whatever you need to say, he's not HOA security, Mrs. Patterson blurted out. We don't even have HOA security. Our neighborhood doesn't have an HOA at all. The words hit Sarah like a physical blow. She stared down at Marcus, whose crying had intensified to the point of hyperventilation. Director Walsh, did you copy that? I heard Martinez. We may be dealing with someone who's been impersonating law enforcement for an extended period. How long has he been in the neighborhood? Mrs. Patterson wrung her hands. He moved in about 6 months ago. Felt a chill run down her spine. Marcus, look at me. Marcus raised his tear-streaked face from the pavement, his eyes red and wild with terror. How long have you been pretending to be security? I wasn't pretending. I was helping. I was keeping everyone safe. With what authority? Director Walsh, I think we need to check missing persons reports and check if there had been any complaints about fake security officers in the area. Already on it. Martinez, I'm seeing something here that's going to make your day even worse. Sarah's stomach dropped. What? Marcus Chen, age 30, unemployed as of 8 months ago, previous job was night security at a mall, terminated for erratic behavior and confronting customers. Jesus. There have been 17 complaints filed against a fake HOA security officer in your area over the past 4 months. On the sidewalk, 17 complaints. Mrs. Patterson gasped. The Johnsons moved away last month, said they couldn't take the harassment anymore. And the Chen's no relation. They put their house up for sale after Marcus accused them of ... Oh my God. Accused them of what, ma'am? Of not belonging in the neighborhood, said they were bringing down property values. The pieces were falling into place with horrifying clarity. Marcus hadn't just threatened Sarah and Emma today. He'd been terrorizing the entire neighborhood for months, driving families away with his fake authority and barely concealed bigotry. Director Walsh, we need to contact everyone who's moved out of this neighborhood in the past 6 months. This isn't just about today. Already putting together a task force. Martinez, your vacation just got extended indefinitely. The cavalry was coming, but the damage was already done. How many families had been driven from their homes? Emma had climbed down from the porch and was now standing at the edge of their lawn, her small face streaked with tears, but her eyes bright with something that looked like pride. Mommy, are you going to arrest the bad man? Her daughter had just witnessed something no child should see. But there was a strength in Emma's voice that reminded Sarah exactly why she'd chosen this career in the first place. Yes, maybe Mommy's going to make sure the bad man can't hurt anyone else. Marcus looked up at Sarah with desperate, pleading eyes. Please, I was just trying to help. I was just trying to keep the neighborhood safe. You never meant to get caught. Sarah cut him off. But you did mean to terrorize families. You did mean to drive people away from their homes. And you sure as hell meant to point that gun at my 8-year-old daughter. The first FBI vehicle turned onto Maple Lane, followed by 2 more unmarked cars and a local police cruiser. Within minutes, the quiet suburban street was transformed into a federal crime scene. But as Sarah watched her colleagues pour out of their vehicles, Marcus Chen wasn't just a wannabe security guard with a power complex. He was a domestic terrorist who had been operating in plain sight. Marcuson began reading him his rights. Sarah looked around at her neighbors' faces. Fear, shock, embarrassment, and something else, relief. The answer to that question would determine whether Marcus Chen spent the next decade in federal prison or the rest of his natural life. Special Agent Jake Morrison crouched next to Marcus's discarded weapon, his evidence gloves pristine against the black plastic. Sarah, you're going to want to see this. Sarah stood over Marcus as 2 other agents secured him with zip-tie restraints. Her Glock finally holstered, but her hand still resting on the grip. The entire street had been cordoned off with yellow tape, transforming the suburban paradise into something resembling a war zone. What have you got, Jake? Morrison held up the weapon with a pair of tweezers. Airsoft gun, high-end replica. But completely fake. Serial numbers have been filed off, and someone's painted over the orange tip. Son of a bitch! Sarah's jaw clenched as she stared down at Marcus, who was now sitting on the curb with his head between his knees. You pointed a toy gun at my daughter. Marcus looked up, his face streaked with tears and snot. I just wanted them to take me seriously. Nobody ever takes me seriously. Well, congratulations, Sarah said coldly. The federal government is taking you very seriously now. Director Walsh approached, his phone pressed to his ear and his expression grim. Sarah had worked with Thomas Walsh for 8 years, and she'd never seen him look this disturbed. Martinez, we've got a problem. A big one. Bigger than a fake security guard terrorizing an entire neighborhood. Walsh ended his call and pulled Sarah aside, away from the growing crowd of agents and neighbors. That was the U.S. Attorney's Office. They want to know if we're looking at a hate crime enhancement. Sarah felt her blood pressure spike. Did you find? Your neighbor, Mrs. Patterson, wasn't the only one willing to talk. Agent Stevens just finished interviewing the Patel family 3 streets over. According to them, Marcus has been harassing minority families specifically for months. How specifically? Walsh consulted his notes. The Patel's Indian family moved here from Boston. Marcus told them their cooking smells were violating community standards and threatened to have them evicted. The Williamses' black family with 2 teenage sons. Marcus accused their kids of dealing drugs and followed them to school multiple times. Sarah's hands clenched into fists. Jesus Christ, it gets worse. The Gonzalez family. Marcus told them their landscaping was too ethnic and demanded they remove what he called foreign plants from their garden. Where the hell was real law enforcement during all this? That's the million-dollar question. Walsh's expression darkened further. Turns out, Marcus was smart about it. He never used the same complaint twice with the same family. Made it look like isolated incidents instead of a pattern of harassment. Sarah looked back toward Emma, who was now sitting on their porch with Agent Chun, no relation to Marcus, reading her a picture book while the crime scene team worked. Her daughter seemed remarkably calm for someone who just had a gun pointed at her. But Sarah knew the real trauma would hit later. Director, I want to interview him myself. Sarah, you're too close to this. Your daughter was threatened.
But
Stevens Handel, my daughter, was threatened by a man who's been systematically terrorizing minority families for months. This isn't just about Emmett anymore. Walsh studied her face for a long moment, then nodded. 5 minutes, and Martinez, don't give him any ammunition for an excessive force claim. Sarah walked back to where Marcus sat hunched on the curb, his fake uniform wrinkled and stained with tears. Agent Morrison stepped aside as she approached, but stayed within earshot. Marcus, look at me. Marcus raised his head slowly, his pale blue eyes rimmed with red. I want you to understand something, Sarah said, her voice calm but carrying the weight of absolute authority. In the next hour, federal agents are going to interview every family in this neighborhood. They're going to document every conversation you've had, every complaint you've made, every time you've harassed someone. Marcus's Adam's apple bobbed as he swallowed hard. But right now, I'm going to give you one chance to tell me the truth. Why did you target minority families? I didn't, Marcus. Sarah's voice cut through his denial like a blade. We have documentation. We have witnesses. We have video evidence. The only question now is whether you're going to be honest about your motivations, or whether we're going to let a federal jury decide what was in your heart. Marcus began crying again, but this time the tears seemed different, less panicked, more defeated. I just, ... I wanted to matter, he whispered. My whole life, nobody's ever listened to me. Nobody's ever respected me. But when I put on this uniform, when I told people what to do, they had to listen. And why did you choose to focus on minority families? Marcus was quiet for so long that Sarah thought he wasn't going to answer. When he finally spoke, his voice was barely audible, because they were easier to scare. The admission hung in the air like a toxic cloud. Sarah felt a surge of disgust, so powerful she had to clench her fists to keep from grabbing Marcus by his fake uniform and shaking him. Easier to scare, she repeated slowly, because you knew they'd be less likely to call the police, because you knew they'd be more worried. About making waves, Marcus nodded miserably. You targeted families with children. You made kids afraid to play in their own neighborhoods. You drove people away from their homes. I never meant for it to go this far, Marcus burst out. I just wanted to feel important. I wanted to feel like I had some control. Control over what? Over something. Anything. Marcus's voice cracked. With desperation, do you know what it's like to be 34 years old and have nothing? No career, no family, no respect. I was invisible until I put on this uniform. Sarah stared down at him, feeling a mixture of disgust and pity. So you decided to make other people's lives hell because yours wasn't working out. I was keeping the neighborhood safe. From what? Children playing with balls? Families cooking their traditional food? Teenagers walking to school? Marcus had no answer. He just sat there, crying into his hands while federal agents documented his months of domestic terrorism disguised as community service agent. Stevens approached with a tablet in her hands. Sarah, you need to see this. Sarah looked at the screen, which showed a detailed map of Willowbrook Estates. Red dots marked the homes of every family Marcus had harassed. Blue dots marked the homes of white families. The pattern was unmistakable. Not a single blue dot had been targeted. How many families total? Sarah asked. 11 families harassed. 6 families moved away because of him, and Sarah, ... Stevens scrolled to another screen. We found Marcus's notebook in his house. He kept detailed records. The notebook entries made Sarah's stomach turn. Marcus had documented every interaction, every complaint, every successful intimidation. He'd rated families on what he called their compliance levels and kept track of which tactics worked best on which ethnic groups. This is premeditated, Sarah said quietly. This isn't some sad loser who got carried away. This is systematic. Racial intimidation. The U.S. Attorney agrees. They're going to seek hate crime enhancements on every charge. Sarah looked back at Marcus, who was still sobbing on the curb. She thought about Emma's terrified face when that fake gun was pointed at her. She thought about all the other children who'd been scared in their own neighborhoods because of this man's need to feel powerful. But mostly, she thought about the families who'd been driven away from them, parents who'd packed up their children and moved rather than fight back against what they thought was legitimate authority. How long do you think he'll get? Stevens asked. Sarah calculated the charges in her head, impersonating a law enforcement officer. Assault with a deadly weapon on a federal agent, child endangerment, civil rights violations, conspiracy to intimidate, ... And that was just for today. If we can prove the pattern of harassment was racially motivated. Sarah watched as Marcus was finally lifted to his feet and led toward a waiting federal transport vehicle. He'll die in prison. As the transport pulled away, taking Marcus Chen out of Willowbrook Estates forever, Sarah realized that the hardest part was just beginning. 11 families had been terrorized. 6 had been driven from their homes, and 1 little girl would need years of therapy to forget the sight of a gun pointed at her mother. The fake security guard was gone, but the damage he'd done would last much longer than his prison sentence. 3 days after Marcus Chen's arrest, Sarah Martinez stood in the conference room of the FBI's regional field office, staring at a wall covered with photographs, documents, and a timeline that made her stomach churn. The investigation had expanded. Far beyond a single neighborhood, Incident had become a federal case study in domestic terrorism, hiding behind a fake badge. Agent, we've identified 23 separate incidents across 4 different neighborhoods. Director Walsh sat at the head of the conference table, his expression grim as he flipped through confiscated notebooks. These entries go back 18 months. He's been perfecting his methods. Sarah picked up one of the notebooks, her hands trembling slightly as she read Marcus's meticulous handwriting. Rodriguez family threatened. Note, religious symbols particularly. Effective for intimidation. This is sick, she whispered. Marcus was part of a forum called Neighborhood Watch Patriots, where they shared tactics for what they called community preservation. Walsh looked up sharply. The FBI's domestic terrorism unit is taking point on that aspect. But Sarah, your case with Marcus is the key to unraveling the whole thing. Sarah's phone buzzed with a text from her sister. How's Emma doing? The video is everywhere now. Had been parked outside Sarah's house for 2 days straight. I need to get back to Emma, Sarah said, closing the notebook. She's been having nightmares. Actually, Walsh said, that's why I called this meeting. The U.S. attorney wants to discuss a plea agreement. Sarah's blood ran cold. A plea agreement? For what? Marcus's lawyer is claiming his client is mentally ill, says he was having a psychotic break and wasn't responsible for his actions. That's bullshit, and you know it. Sarah's voice rose. This was calculated harassment, not mental illness. Stevens nodded in agreement. The psych evaluation came back yesterday. He's narcissistic and has some antisocial tendencies, but he's legally sane. Then why is the U.S. attorney even considering a plea? Walsh hesitated. Because Marcus's lawyer is threatening to make this about you. What the hell does that mean? He's claiming you used excessive force. Says you had no right to draw your weapon on a man with a toy gun. Sarah stared at him in disbelief. I didn't know it was a toy gun, and he pointed it at my 8-year-old daughter. I know that you know that. But Marcus's lawyer is going to argue that a trained federal agent should have been able to identify a fake weapon, and that your emotional response compromised your judgment. My emotional response? Sarah's voice turned deadly quiet. My emotional response to a man threatening my child with what appeared to be a deadly weapon? Sarah, calm down. Nobody here believes that garbage. Sarah felt the world shift beneath her feet. He wants to put my daughter on the witness stand. He's claiming Emma wasn't actually in danger because the gun was fake, and that your overreaction traumatized his client. Sarah's hands slowly clenched into fists. That son of a bitch pointed a gun fake or not at an 8-year-old girl, and now he's claiming he's the victim. Walsh held up his hands. Sarah, I need you to think clearly here. If this goes to trial, it's going to be a media circus. Do you really want to put her through that? Sarah thought about Emma's nightmares, about the way her daughter had been clinging to her for the past 3 days, about the news crews camped outside their house, families he'd driven away, and the network of fake security guards potentially operating across the country. What kind of plea are they offering? Stevens consulted her notes. 5 years for impersonating a law enforcement officer and assault. No hate crime enhancements, no terrorism charges. 5 years. Sarah's voice was flat with disbelief. 18 months of domestic terrorism. With good behavior, he could be out in 3. Sarah stood up abruptly. Director, with respect, if we take this plea, we're telling every wannabe vigilante in America that they can terrorize minority families for years and get a slap on the wrist. But Emma is strong. She's stronger than you think, and she deserves to grow up in a world where men like Marcus Chen face real consequences for their actions. Walsh studied her face for a long moment. You're sure about this? I'm sure. Stevens leaned forward. We've been contacted by representatives of the families Marcus harassed. Class action? Civil suit. Good. They want you to be the lead plaintiff. Sarah sat back down, the implications hitting her, Walsh admitted. But it would also send a message that the FBI takes domestic terrorism seriously. This time it was a text from Emma's teacher. Emma told her class today that her mom is a real-life superhero who catches bad guys. Thought you should know. Despite everything, Sarah smiled. When do we start jury selection? Walsh grinned for the first time in days. That's my agent. Stevens, call the U.S. attorney. Tell him Agent Martinez and her daughter are ready to testify. What about the media circus? Sarah thought about Marcus's notebooks, about the families who'd been driven from their homes, about the network of fake security guards who might be watching this case to see if their tactics would be tolerated. It's time the whole country saw what domestic terrorism really looks like. 3 hours later, Sarah walked into her house to find Emma at the kitchen table, drawing a picture. It showed a woman in a blue uniform with a badge, standing protectively in front of a small girl. Who's that, Mia? Emma looked up with bright eyes. Sarah knelt down beside her daughter's chair. Emma, we need to talk about what's going to happen next. Are you going to put the bad man in jail forever? I'm going to try, but it might take a while, and there might be some difficult days ahead. Emma considered this seriously. Will I have to talk to the judge? Sarah's heart clenched. Maybe would that scare you? Emma shook her head firmly. No, I want to tell everyone that he was mean to you and me. I want to make sure he can't be mean to other kids. Sarah pulled her daughter into a tight hug, marveling at the strength in that small body. You know what, baby? I think you're going to change the world. Sarah Martinez felt like they were going to win. The reckoning was coming, and it was going to be televised. 6 months later, Sarah Martinez adjusted her federal dress uniform as she walked up the marble steps of the U.S. District Courthouse. Camera flashes exploded around her like fireworks, and reporters shouted questions she'd heard 100 times before. But today was different. Today, Marcus Chen would finally face a jury of his peers. Agent Martinez: how do you respond to defense claims that you overreacted? Agent Martinez: is it true your daughter will testify? Sarah kept her eyes forward, her hand protectively placed on Emma's shoulder. Her daughter wore a navy blue dress and white shoes, looking impossibly small against the backdrop of federal justice. But Emma's chin was raised defiantly, and she walked with the same purposeful stride as her mother. Inside the courthouse, the gallery was packed. Sarah recognized faces from Willowbrook Estates: Mrs. Patterson, Mr. Rodriguez, the Patel family who had driven 6 hours to be here. But there were other faces too, families she'd never met who had come forward after Marcus's arrest, each with their own story of harassment and intimidation. At the defense table, Marcus Chen looked different. Gone was the fake uniform and manufactured authority. In an ill-fitting gray suit, he appeared small and insignificant, exactly what he'd always been beneath the costume. His lawyer, David Brennan, was a sharp-dressed criminal defense attorney, known for getting domestic terrorists reduced sentences. By claiming mental health defenses, all rise for the Honorable Judge Patricia Williams. Judge Williams was a black woman in her 50s who had made her reputation prosecuting civil rights cases before ascending to the federal bench. Marcus's lawyer had tried to get her recused, claiming bias, but the motion had been denied. U.S. Attorney Rebecca Stone stood to deliver her opening statement. Sarah had worked with Stone before. She was brilliant, thorough, and absolutely ruthless. When it came to protecting victims, ladies and gentlemen of the jury, Stone began, over the next week, you're going to hear about a man who terrorized families for 18 months, not with bombs or bullets, but with something equally illusion of authority. Stone clicked a remote, and Marcus's fake badge appeared on the courtroom's large screen. Marcus Chen purchased this badge online for $19.99. With it, he convinced an entire community that he had the right to decide who belonged and who didn't, the right to follow children to school, the right to demand that families remove plants from their gardens because they were too ethnic, the right to point a weapon at an 8-year-old girl because she was playing on a public sidewalk. Sarah felt Emma's hand slip into hers. The daughter had been prepped by victim services counselors, but Sarah knew this was still overwhelming. The defense will try to convince you that Marcus Chen is a victim of mental illness, Stone continued. They will claim he didn't understand the consequences of his actions, but the evidence will show you something different. The evidence will show you a man who kept detailed notebooks documenting his campaigns of harassment, a man who researched which tactics worked best on which ethnic groups, a man who was part of online forums dedicated to what they called preserving neighborhood character. Stone paused, letting that sink in. Marcus Chen didn't have a mental breakdown, ladies and gentlemen. He had a plan to use fear and the appearance of authority to drive families he deemed undesirable from their homes. This is domestic terrorism, pure and simple. Defense. Attorney Brennan's opening was predictable. Mental illness, delusions of authority, a sad, lonely man who never meant to hurt anyone. He painted Marcus as a victim of society's indifference, someone who had snapped under the pressure of unemployment and social isolation. My client never physically harmed anyone, Brennan argued. He never fired a weapon. He never even owned a real weapon. Marcus Chen is a sick man who needs treatment, not punishment. Sarah gritted her teeth as Brennan continued his character. Assassination disguised as a defense strategy. The prosecution's case unfolded methodically over 3 days. Victim after victim took the stand, describing months of harassment. The Patel family testified about being followed to their temple and told their religious practices were disturbing the peace. The Williams family described Marcus's accusations that their teenage sons were gang members based solely on their clothing choices. Each testimony was devastating, but it was the evidence from Marcus's seized computer that sealed his fate. Agent Stevens walked the jury through months of online activity, showing how Marcus had researched effective intimidation techniques and bragged about his successful relocations in white supremacist forums. The defendant didn't just harass these families randomly. Stevens testified. He studied them. He learned their schedules, their vulnerabilities, their cultural practices, and then weaponized that information to make their lives unbearable. On the fourth day, Sarah took the stand. Agent Martinez, U.S. Attorney Stone, began. Please tell the jury what you observed when you first saw the defendant approaching your daughter. Sarah had rehearsed this testimony dozens of times, but sitting in the witness box, looking at the jury, the memories felt fresh and raw. I saw a man in what appeared to be a security uniform walking aggressively toward my 8-year-old daughter. His body language was threatening, and he was shouting at her to stop playing. What was your daughter doing at the time? Playing with a ball on the public sidewalk in front of our home? Stone walked Sarah through the entire encounter, from Marcus's racist comments to the moment he pointed the fake weapon at Emma. When she reached that part of her testimony, Sarah noticed several jurors lean forward, their faces reflecting horror and outrage. Agent Martinez, in your professional opinion as a federal law enforcement officer, did you have reasonable cause to believe your daughter was in imminent danger? Absolutely. The defendant pointed what appeared to be a service weapon at my child. While making threats, any reasonable person would have perceived that as a deadly threat. Brennan's cross-examination was brutal. He attacked Sarah's professionalism, her emotional state, even her decision to move to Willowbrook Estates. Isn't it true, Agent Martinez, that you chose to live in an overwhelmingly white neighborhood? Sarah felt her jaw clench. I chose to live in a safe neighborhood where my daughter could play outside. And isn't it true that you immediately assumed racial motivations for my client's actions? I assumed nothing. Your client's own words and actions made his motivations clear. But you had no way of knowing his true mental state, did you? Knew he was pointing a gun at my daughter. That was enough. Brennan tried to rattle her for another hour, but Sarah had testified in federal court dozens of times. She remained calm, professional, and unshakable. Then came the moment everyone had been waiting for. Emma Martinez, 8 years old, walked to the witness stand. Judge Williams had cleared the gallery of cameras and most spectators. Only the jury, the lawyers, and immediate family remained. Emma looked impossibly small in the witness chair, but her voice was clear and strong. Emma Stone said gently, "Can you tell us what happened that day when you were playing outside?" "I was playing with my ball, and the mean man came over and yelled at me. He said I couldn't play there. Were you scared?" "Yes, he was really loud, and his face was red." "What happened next?" Emma looked over at Marcus, who was staring at the defense table, unable to meet her eyes. "He said mean things to my mommy. Then he took out a gun and pointed it at me." Several jurors visibly reacted. One woman covered her mouth with her hand. "What did you think when you saw the gun?" Emma's voice got smaller. "I thought he was going to hurt me and my mommy." Brennan's cross-examination of Emma lasted less than 5 minutes. Even he wasn't heartless enough to attack a child who had been traumatized by his client. The defense case was weak. Brennan put on a parade of mental health experts who had never actually treated Marcus, all claiming he suffered from various personality disorders that diminished his capacity for criminal intent. But under cross-examination, each expert admitted that Marcus's detailed planning and methodical harassment showed clear criminal thinking. Marcus himself never took the stand. Closing arguments were passionate on both sides, but the evidence was overwhelming. After deliberating for just 4 hours, the jury returned with their verdict. On the charge of impersonating a federal officer, we find the defendant guilty. On the charge of assault with a deadly weapon on a federal agent, we find the defendant guilty. On the charge of terroristic threatening involving a minor child, we find the defendant guilty. The guilty verdicts continued for all 17 federal charges. With each one, Sarah felt a weight lift from her shoulders. Marcus Chen would spend the next 25 years to life in federal prison. But it was Judge Williams's words during sentencing that Sarah would remember forever. "Mr. Chen, you exploited one of the fundamental foundations of civil society, the assumption that authority figures are legitimate. You used that exploitation to terrorize families based on their race, their religion, and their ethnicity. You turned neighborhoods into hunting grounds and children into prey." Judge Williams looked directly at Marcus, who sat slumped in his chair. "The court sentences you to 28 years in federal prison without the possibility of parole. But more than that, the court wants every wannabe vigilante watching this CAA 2 years after Marcus Chin's conviction, Sarah Martinez stood in the gleaming conference room of the FBI's Domestic Terrorism Task Force, watching as Agent Stevens pinned another red marker on the national map. The wall was covered with dozens of pins, now each one representing a fake security guard, self-appointed HOA enforcer, or neighborhood vigilante who had been arrested following the Chen case. "That's number 47, Stevens announced. Phoenix PD just arrested a man calling himself Community Safety Director who was demanding to see residents' papers in a predominantly Latino neighborhood. Director Walsh, now promoted to deputy director of the FBI, shook his head in amazement. The Chen precedent is working. Every jurisdiction in the country knows how to prosecute these cases now. Sarah traced her finger along the timeline they'd constructed. It started with Marcus, but he was just the tip of the iceberg. The investigation had exploded far beyond a single neighborhood terrorist. Marcus's online activities had led them to the Neighborhood Watch Patriots Forum, which had over 3,000 members nationwide. The forum had been a breeding ground for wannabe authoritarians, sharing tactics for intimidating families they deemed undesirable while staying just within the bounds of legal harassment. Until the Chen case changed everything. "The legal precedent you established," Walsh continued, "made it possible to prosecute these crimes as domestic terrorism rather than simple harassment. Federal prosecutors can now seek enhanced penalties for racially motivated neighborhood intimidation." Sarah's phone buzzed with a text from Emma, now 10 years old. "Mom, my teacher wants to know if you can speak at our career day about catching bad guys." Sarah smiled. Emma had not only recovered from her trauma, but had become something of a local celebrity. The girl who had faced down a fake security guard with a gun was now the kid who told her classmates that bullies were just scared people pretending to be tough. "There's something else," Stevens said, pulling out a thick folder. "We've been tracking the families who were displaced by Chen and others like him. We've got some good news." She opened the folder to reveal a series of photographs. Families standing in front of houses, children playing in yards, parents smiling at barbecues. 63 families have moved back to neighborhoods they were forced to leave by fake security harassment. The Gonzalez family bought back their house in Willowbrook Estates last month. Sarah felt a warmth spread through her chest. They came home. More than that, property values in targeted neighborhoods have actually increased since these arrests started. Turns out, when people know they're protected from harassment, they want to live there. Walsh pulled up a presentation on the conference room screen. "Sarah, I brought you here because we want to expand the program. The Chen Task Force is going national." The screen showed a organizational chart with Sarah's name at the top. "You'd be heading up a specialized unit dedicated to identifying and prosecuting domestic terrorism disguised as community security. Full federal resources, national jurisdiction." Sarah stared at the chart, overwhelmed. "You want me to hunt fake security guards for a living?" "We want you to hunt domestic terrorists for a living," Walsh corrected. "The methods don't matter. Badges, HOA enforcement, neighborhood watch groups. What matters is the systematic intimidation of families based on race, religion, or ethnicity." Stevens added another detail. "We've also been contacted by several foreign law enforcement agencies. Apparently, this kind of low-level domestic terrorism is a global problem. Canada, the UK, Australia, they all want to learn from the Chen protocols." Sarah thought about Marcus Chen, now serving his 28-year sentence in federal prison. Last she'd heard, he was working in the prison laundry and had become a pariah, even among other inmates. Domestic terrorists, it turned out, weren't popular even in prison. "What about Emma?" Sarah asked. "This job would mean more travel, more high-profile cases." "Actually," Walsh smiled, "we thought about that too." He clicked to the next slide, which showed a comprehensive victim services program. "Part of your unit would be dedicated to supporting families who've been targeted. Counseling, legal aid, relocation assistance if needed. We want Emma to see that her experience is helping other kids." Sarah's phone rang. The caller ID showed a number she didn't recognize, but the area code was familiar. Willowbrook Estates. "Agent Martinez. This is Helen Patterson. I hope you remember me." "Of course, Mrs. Patterson. How are you?" "I'm wonderful, dear. I'm calling because something marvelous has happened. You know the Patel family, the ones who moved away because of that horrible man?" "Yes. I remember them well. They've moved back, and not just them three, other families have returned to the neighborhood. We're having a block party next weekend to welcome everyone home, and we'd love for you and Emma to come. Sarah felt tears prick her eyes. We'd be honored. There's more, dear. The whole neighborhood has decided to create a real community watch program, not the fake kind that awful man pretended to run, but a real one. We're partnering with the local police to make sure everyone feels safe and welcome. After hanging up, Sarah looked around the conference room at her colleagues. These people had become family over the past 2 years, united by their mission to ensure that no child would ever again face what Emma had faced. I'll take the job, she said quietly, but I have conditions. Name them, Walsh replied. First, any family that's been targeted gets full victim services support, regardless of their immigration status or ability to pay. Done. Second, we develop a public education program. People need to know how to spot fake authority figures and how to report them. Agreed. Third, Emma comes with me to appropriate events. I want her to see that her experience mattered, that it's helping other families. Walsh nodded. Sarah, there's something else you should know. The White House has been following this case. They want to present you and Emma with the Presidential Citizens Medal. Sarah sat down heavily. The what? The Presidential Citizens Medal. It's awarded to citizens who have demonstrated exemplary deeds of service for their country or fellow citizens. Stevens grinned. You exposed a network of domestic terrorists and created a legal framework that's protected hundreds of families. Emma showed incredible courage in testifying against her attacker. You both deserve recognition. That evening, Sarah sat on her porch with Emma, watching the 10-year-old practice skateboarding on the same sidewalk where Marcus Chen had once pointed a gun at her. The neighborhood was alive with the sounds of children playing, families talking over fences, and the normal rhythm of community life. Mom, Emma said, taking a break from her skateboard. Mrs. Rodriguez told me you're going to catch more bad guys like Marcus. That's right, baby. Is that okay with you? Emma considered this seriously, as she always did. Will you be gone a lot? Sometimes, but you'll come with me when you can, and we'll help other kids who got scared by fake police. Emma nodded firmly. Good, because Marcus was really mean, and if there are more people like him, they should go to jail too. Sarah pulled her daughter close. You know what I'm proudest of? What you're not afraid anymore? You're not afraid to play outside, you're not afraid to stand up to bullies, and you're not afraid to tell the truth when it matters. Emma grinned. That's because I have the best mom in the world, and she taught me that real police protect people, and fake police are just scared bullies. As they sat on the porch, Sarah's phone buzzed with a news alert, breaking, 3 more fake security guards arrested in coordinated FBI raids across Texas. Suspects charged with federal domestic terrorism violations under the Chen protocols. Sarah smiled and showed the alert to Emma. We did that, Emma asked. We started it, and now it's bigger than just us. Across the street, Mr. Rodriguez waved from his yard where he was playing soccer with his grandchildren. 2 houses down, the Patel family was hosting what looked like a dinner party, their laughter carrying across the evening air. At the end of the block, the for sale sign that had been a permanent fixture during Marcus's reign of terror had been replaced with a welcome to the neighborhood banner. Willowbrook Estates had healed. More importantly, it had learned to protect itself not through fear and intimidation, but through genuine community and mutual respect. As they headed inside for dinner, do you think Marcus ever thinks about what he did? Sarah paused at their front door, looking back at the neighborhood that had become a symbol of resilience and justice. I think Marcus thinks about it every day, baby. I think he sits in his prison cell and realizes that all he accomplished was bringing a community together and showing the world how to fight back against people like him. Emma smiled. So we won. We won. Inside their house, the walls were decorated with letters from families across the country who had been helped by the Chen Task Force. Photos showed children playing safely in neighborhoods that had once been hunting grounds for fake authoritarians. A framed copy of Emma's testimony sat on the mantel not as a reminder of trauma, but as proof of courage. But the most important decoration was a simple drawing Emma had made in art class, a neighborhood full of different families, all playing together under a bright yellow sun. At the bottom, in her careful 10-year-old handwriting, were the words, "Home is where everyone belongs." Marcus Chen had tea.